Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Welcome to Women's Hoops and Talks, the What podcast, where we are elevating the voice of women in basketball. I am Tara, here with Cassidy, and we are ready to talk a tiny little bit of Blazers. They just came off of a loss to Houston, so I don't think we're going to want to dwell on that. And then we've got a really fantastic interview we're going to share with everyone. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. How you doing today, Cassidy?
I'm doing pretty good besides the Blazer loss. But we always introduce the show talking about our Blazers what. But can you explain what the what is in our Blazers what?
I would be glad to talk about what hashtag Blazers what stands for. So Women's Hoops and Talks, as you may notice now that I've pointed it out, is a very clever acronym. That's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke because I have this thing for making acronyms like words and stuff. And so basically I started Women's Hoops and Talks. It had a nice acronym, WHAT. I started that as a way to get all my female friends together who love the Blazers to watch games together and talk about the Blazers. I started it with my former podcast partner, Jo Wolfenstein. She and I used to do the Blazers Edge podcast a couple of times a month. And we were like, hey, we should find all the women in town who get together and watch games together. And so we went and tried to figure out like where all those groups were, and realized there wasn't any per se that we knew of. So we decided that we would just start it off. So Women's Hoops and Talks and the Women's Hoops and Talks podcast is what came out of that crazy harebrained idea.
That's awesome. And you mentioned meetups. When is the next meetup that people can come and hang out and watch basketball with us?
Yeah, we have monthly meetups during the season that are watch parties. And the next one is coming up on Monday, December 17th. So I want to start at the beginning of the podcast to remind all of our friends who are within driving distance of Portland, Oregon, who want to come join us to watch the Blazers. We are going to be getting together on December 17th. That's a Monday evening. And we get together at the McMinimans on Broadway. It's an awesome setup. They're super gracious, awesome hosts for us. We have a whole room to ourselves, and we have a big screen that we pull down, and we watch the game, and we scream and yell and hug and cry or whatever that is appropriate for the occasion. You've been to the Women's Hoops and Talks meetups before, Cassidy.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you remember?
I love our halftime trivia. That is always a highlight for me because I'm a trivia fiend. And so it's fun to do that with a big group and do it about the Blazers.
Yeah, and I think that you've won a couple of times, haven't you? The prizes from we get local businesses to donate mostly it's t-shirts and art. We've had Evan M and Trailblazin and a couple other local artists in the past have donated prints. The Trailblazers usually give us a few things to give away as well, and we reserve one prize for somebody like Cassidy who has trivia and excels at that, and then we also just have a door prize, because one of the things about the What meetups that I think is really fun is that we have women who have a variety of exposure to the Blazers. We actually have we've had women come before who've never been to a game, but were really curious and wanted to learn more about it and wanted to do it in a low key way. So then we've had people like you who went to the games when you were in your mom's stomach.
Yes. Forever and always a Blazer fan.
So I hope the people who listen to the podcast and can make it will come to a meetup sometime this year, either this Monday, the 17th of December, or you can we've got them all scheduled out for the whole rest of the season, and they're pinned to the top of my Twitter profile That's at TCB Bigs. And I hope that everybody will come out and watch. And of course, supporters of women who love basketball are also welcome. We try to make the events like centered on women and, shower the women with all of the prizes and encourage them to speak up and give their hot takes and stuff, because sometimes women aren't always comfortable doing that. So we definitely encourage all of the women to speak up, and the men who attend are always really great allies and have always been really great about encouraging us to talk and, letting us have the floor. So it's really fun.
And I must say, my husband came to the last one, and I feel like he learned a lot.
Excellent.
It's good for all.
That is awesome. Well, so couple of just fun topics for us to touch on before we get into our interview. First thing is, we are about a quarter of the way into the season, and I went and looked today and looked at the, if the playoffs started today. Now, this scenario has probably already changed like 5 times tonight because the West is so close. So I say that knowing that, what was true this morning is probably not true now and will probably be even different again tomorrow. But this morning when I looked, the standings had OKC was in second, Portland was tied for 6th, but they lost a tiebreaker behind Memphis. And so Portland would take on OKC in the first round of the playoffs. So how do you feel about that matchup, Cassidy? Is that a matchup do you think would favor the Blazers with our limited knowledge and exposure of how the teams are playing this year?
I think so. It is really hard to say because those two teams have not played each other yet this season. And so it's going to be interesting to see when they do play who I think would come out on top. But I think that the Blazers would definitely have somewhat of an advantage in that series. But I would never discount Russell Westbrook's just will to win. So I think it'd be tough.
So it looks like the first time the Blazers and OKC play is January 4th. That is so late in the season. It's really interesting. This year is so strange because there's actually quite a long list of teams the Blazers haven't even seen yet. So I don't know how many games in. We're more than 25 games in, and they have not played Atlanta, Brooklyn, Hornets, Bulls, Cavs, Pistons, OKC, 76ers, the Kings, the Raptors, or the Jazz. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So they've only played a little over half of the league. That's just so strange to me. But anyway, yeah, the first game against OKC is January 4th. My thing about OKC is, at least lately, Damian Lillard absolutely has their number. And I love those OKC games because they're always a Russell Westbrook meltdown.
And they're really fun to watch.
And it's not that I actually don't dislike Russell Westbrook. I actually enjoy him, and I enjoy the concept of him. It's so rare these days that you've got somebody who sticks it out somewhere for a really long time. And I think that kind of goes under the radar with Russell Westbrook. I mean, he's really been there, literally since the beginning. Yeah. And I think that just kind of goes a little bit under the radar, and I respect him for that. And he's also another one of those guys who, like, everybody left, and he was left holding the bag.
Mm-hmm. And he did a good job.
But that doesn't mean I don't love it when Damian Lillard takes him right to the edge and just makes him completely melt down and kick the ball and throw things and have a hissy fit. I love it.
Yeah.
I think that would be a super fun series.
I do too. I think it would be really fun. And then I feel like we always have a thing against OKC, and it's probably because they came from Seattle, but it's left over, but I still love it. I love that atmosphere against them.
Yes. I think I can't wait to play him and see how it goes.
After tonight's game, I got to thinking, after seeing Clyde Drexler be a broadcaster for Houston, which always breaks my heart a little because I wish he was here. I'm wondering if you could see one former Trailblazer join the TV broadcast team, who would you want to see?
I don't know. I mean, definitely not Bill Walton. Let me I'm very clear on that one. I feel like somebody. I feel like somebody like Scottie Pippen would be great. I mean, I know he's actually really a Chicago Bull, but
And he does players
yeah,
only
but
now.
he has just that gorgeous voice, which I could totally listen to all night long. He's got like that velvety voice with that little bit of a southern drawl, and I just think that would be like really nice to listen to. But he also is really he has interesting things to say, so I think he would be an interesting commentator. I think somebody like Rashid could be really fun because people talk about like how smart and how good he is, and I think he could be really great at that. I mean, we could always bring back Steve Blake another time, but I don't know. Maybe
he's busy coaching.
Maybe Rashid. I don't know. How about you?
I think Sheed was definitely the first one that came to mind. Just because I think that would be so much fun. I also thought about Greg Anthony, even though obviously he does that other places. It's always fun to listen to him, and even though he was only in Portland for a little bit, he was definitely one of my favorite players at the time. And so I would like to see that happen again. And I think he enjoyed Portland to an extent. So.
You know who my number one person would be if he was still with us would be Jerome Kersey.
Oh, absolutely.
He'd be amazing.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. So my thing about Clyde is I love Clyde, and he was like my favorite Blazer for the longest time, really until Damian Lillard came along. But one thing that did not help with my appreciation for Clyde was his really short-lived appearance on Dancing with the Stars. Did you see that?
Oh, no.
Oh,
I didn't.
Man.
I think I blocked that from my memory that it existed because I just didn't want it to exist.
Yeah, it was rough. And, I'm not like I'm putting myself out there on Dancing with the Stars. So, more power to him for being brave enough to be out there. But it was just like, I'm just not sure that, guys who are over 6.5 feet tall, who've run their bodies that hard their entire lives, they just aren't real smooth, even though he's the Glide.
Yeah. Maybe not meant for
Yeah, exactly. So after I saw that, I was just like, and then Damian Lillard came along, and I was like, okay, Damian is now my favorite.
Well, I think that's a fair enough assessment of that. Well, with the holiday season coming up, what would you think the Blazers should ask Santa for this year?
Okay, I'm notoriously bad at giving gifts. So trying to think about the best thing to give people is very hard for me. But I think one thing that the Blazers could definitely make use of would be an extra coach, either a big man coach or a defensive specialist. And I don't know who they have on the team anymore who might fit into that defensive specialist category. And I've seen a lot of progress on defense over the last couple of seasons. I mean, there's no denying that the Blazers have learned a lot. But I just like the idea of someone whose sole job it is to spend all their time scheming on defense so that Terry Stotts can have time to do all of the offensive scheming.
Yeah, that would be
and
really nice.
I really miss them, the big man coach that they used to have, Kim Hughes. So either a big man coach or a defensive specialist. I think Zach Collins would really flourish under that kind of attention like Myers was getting from Kim Hughes, and who I really think that if Kim Hughes had stuck around, we may have seen a little bit faster progression of Myers. I think that may have been difficult for him without him. So, and I think Zach Collins right now, he's kind of in this place where he's had some rough games. He's not playing as well as he did at the beginning of the year. And if he had someone to just really concentrate and focus on him, I think Nurkic's development has gone so well. And I think his development is, pretty much just as long as he's tight with Damian Lillard, that's what's most important to him.
Yeah, that's definitely a key. And I think that the best thing that Santa could bring the Blazers is a starting spot on the All-Star team for Damian Lillard. Because I think that kind of boost of energy is what this team could use. And I think that it would be so much fun. And I think Lillard deserves that spot. And I would absolutely love to see that happen. So everyone, please vote for the All-Star team when the ballot comes out. I don't even know when it's coming out, but I'm starting campaign.
Okay,
now.
and you have Twitter now. So you got to do your part. You got to get all your friends. If your husband has Twitter or doesn't have Twitter, got to get on his account, and you got to I'm going to get on my husband's account and everybody I know and all my burner accounts. And we're all going to be doing whatever the hashtag is for the year. I've been trying to figure out what the hashtag is going to be for the year. And I think it's coming up really soon because I noticed on the NBA website, the little icon has appeared on the player on like the player profile pages. There's like a little icon. I was like, oh, it's the All-Star icon, and I clicked on it and I was like so excited. I was like, the All-Star voting has started, but it was from last year. So, got to have a little talk with their content strategist. Like, don't put that up there if it's not time. And I don't know if it was there before, but I just noticed it the other day because I was so excited. And I thought I got to go cast my first vote for Damian Lillard, but not yet. But I do think it's getting close. Yes,
I hope so. And I think usually it's right around Christmas, so I think that should happen soon.
Well, so I got one last question before we lead into the interview, because we're going to be talking with Anna Jane Smith, who is someone who knows a whole bunch about stats. And look, a few months ago, I put out on Twitter, I was like, who are some women who are really good at NBA stats? Because I'm really trying to find someone to talk to about it. But most of the people who are like super into stats, if they identify themselves, because a lot of people like don't identify themselves, are men. But our friend Kelsey O'Brien from Raptors said, talk to Anna Jane Smith because she is great. And we did. But one of the things we talked about was like, how she watches a game. So I was wondering if you, Cassidy, do you have any like game watching routines? How do you watch a game?
I usually am cooking dinner for part of it. But then I usually watch the game. I regularly check the box score throughout the game during timeouts and such. I'm regularly checking my fantasy team at the same time. But for the most part, I just try to watch and enjoy the game. And then I think I do a lot more of the thinking about the game when I do a rewatch, because I definitely watch as a fan. I'm definitely screaming at my TV a lot during close games. I'm pretty sure my neighbors down the street can hear us. So get pretty into it. And I really try to watch at least while it's happening as a fan, and then try to really break it down later when I rewatch games. How about you?
So the first time I watch the game, I'm usually live tweeting it. So I have it up in my living room, and then I usually have my computer open and I'm tweeting and I'm checking box scores so that I can like keep track of how, what people's statistics are. And I just, make comments about what's going on with the game. But because of that, I'm looking down at my computer a lot and I'm not looking up. So I'm listening. And sometimes I'll actually listen to the radio and then just have the TV on silent, and everything isn't like quite synced up, but it's close enough that like if I hear something on the radio, I can look up and see it. Mm-hmm. And then when I go back and do the second time, that's when I really pay attention to all the nuances. And sometimes when I'm watching, I started doing this last year where I'll like pick a player to watch during the game. And usually it's Aminu. Oh, yeah. But like lately I've been watching Mo Harkless, and I'll watch him for extended periods of time and just watch what he's doing. And I find that gives me a better idea of what's really going on. Because sometimes if you look at the box score and they don't have a lot of stuff in the box score, but you were watching what they were doing, you can see that they've contributed a lot more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Let's go ahead and play our interview with Anna Jane Smith. She, like we said, is somebody who knows a lot about analytics, and we had some questions about, what are some of the basics to know and what are some of the ways to evaluate a player, ways to evaluate a team. Got some really good advice, and she also lists a lot of really great resources. So if you are a listener who happens to be interested in trying to figure out how to get more into statistics, you might want to grab a pen and a pencil and get ready to write some stuff down, because she had some really valuable things to share. Anna Jane, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
If you could start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about how you became interested in basketball.
Sure. So my name is Anna Jane Smith. I am at Verticality on Twitter. I am a part of, I guess, what you would call Raptors Twitter. I live in Canada, so I'm a Raptors fan. How I got into basketball, basically my parents are both big Raptors fans, and I used to be a huge political junkie, and most of my kind of sort of online life was following politics, and I just got so tired of it. It's just such toxic discussion, and my parents are both Raptors fans, so it was something I could talk to them about. And so I got into basketball. And then, of course, because I'm an extremely obsessive person, I got super obsessed with the sport. It's a beautiful sport. It's so aesthetically pleasing. And I love the way it's like a sport that you can approach analytically, because I'm a very kind of analytical type person, like mathy, I guess. But at the same time, it's not like baseball where you can basically completely describe players and teams with analytics. Like there's a lot of mystery, even when you try to like crunch the numbers. And just, the more you watch basketball, the better you see it, all of the different plays, the way the league changes over time. I just find it like fascinating, and it's such a aesthetically beautiful game. There's so many different ways to play, so many different ways you can run a team. The league's always changing, young teams trying new things, new combinations of players, like, the evolution of the 3-point shot, moire ball, all this kind of stuff. Like it's super fun to follow. So I just became totally obsessed, and now I'm my parents like roll my eyes because I always want to talk about basketball. So I sort of overdid it, like I do everything. But that's my story.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a similar story. That's definitely, I got into basketball because of my parents. So, but speaking of analytics, what kind of stats do you feel are the most useful when evaluating individual players?
What stats do I think are useful for evaluating individual players?
Yeah.
I guess I'd say like the simplest stats are always the best stats. So like, first of all, I mean, you don't have to be like a stat head to enjoy basketball. Like it's a fun game to watch just as a casual fan. And some people are just very visually oriented, and they just, numbers don't do it for them. So like nothing that I say should give the impression that I think if you don't look at numbers, you're a bad fan or you can't understand the game. If that's not the way you approach things, like that's not the way you approach things. So, no stats if you don't want to look at them. But, if you do, I guess the thing is that basketball is like a hard sport to watch, right? It's a complicated game. And when we watch in the moment, like, especially if we haven't been watching and if we haven't played a lot of basketball in our lives, it's hard to really kind of see what's going on at an in-depth level. And when I watch the games, like, if I watch once and if I have enough time, I can watch again, I often see things very differently. I remember this game last year, and it was like a game the Raptors played against Miami Heat, and they like were up by 15 in the fourth quarter, and they almost blew it. They won by 2. Like their closing lineup was a disaster. And I was like, at the time I was like, oh, it's DeRozan was so awful, and he's so terrible closing games. And then some DeRozan fans were getting after me. And then I realized, like, I watched it again the next day, and I was like, that, almost nothing was DeRozan's fault. Like that was, in that case, it was Kyle Lowry had a terrible game. But you're just watching in real time. Often you'll see what you expect to see.
Yeah.
And that's why, to me, the simplest stats are just go back, and just go to NBA.com, Players Advanced, look at net ratings, look at on-off, look at assist percentage, true shooting, turnover ratio. Those kinds of numbers tell you a lot. They tell you, and look at the different lineups, what lineups work, what lineups don't. And then go back and watch the game and try to figure out why. Like, what is it that's driving? Why is this lineup so bad? Like, what is the problem? And, so numbers in that sense can be very complementary, and they can help us kind of second guess ourselves. Because, and again, if you're not into that, that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with just watching games for the enjoyment of it. You don't have to be like a basketball intellectual. in a sense, it's a giant waste of time to be a basketball intellectual if it's just a hobby. But I do think like the simplest stats, the stuff you can find on B-Ball Ref and on NBA.com, which are free, those are the stats that are most useful. And so just getting familiar with NBA.com, which is a fairly easy website to use, that would be my suggestion for someone who just wants to kind of up their analysis of what they're watching.
Do you find, or how do you approach when you're trying to figure out like how an individual player is doing over time versus like you're trying to figure out what's going on with the team? Do you look at a like different set of things to evaluate that, or because like one of the things that's going on with the Blazers right now is like they got this great start and then suddenly they just fell off a cliff for several games where they just like their defense just went in the gutter. So how do you evaluate like whether or not try to figure out, because it's always a combination of things, but what are some of the ways that you look at like is a certain player having a tough time, or is the team just not playing well? Kind of just the difference between looking at individual player stats and looking at team-wide stats.
Yeah, so that's really tricky. And I noticed that the Blazers had been struggling a little bit recently after this kind of red hot start that they had. And I think with fans, like there's always a tendency, we all do it, I definitely do it, is just to want to, to overanalyze noise. Like sometimes the team just gets tired, things are a little off. You might be playing super, super well at the beginning of the season just because everything has come together and you're regressing to some sort of mean, or you get scouted and, other teams kind of figure out how to attack you, and then you have to counter, and it might take you a while to counter because what you were doing was so successful. I tend to look at lineup data. So I'll go in and I'll look at the sort of most used lineups. And again, mostly I do this for the Raptors. I do it a little bit for the Thunder and the Magic, and two other teams that I follow. And I'll sort of look at the numbers for what lineups are succeeding and what lineups are not succeeding. And what combinations of players are working and what combinations of players are not working. That's kind of the basic start. And again, it's very basic stuff. Like it's descriptive. Like we call these statistics, but they are statistics only in like the most descriptive sets, right? You have the offensive rating, like how many points is this lineup scoring per 100 possessions? Defensive rating, how many points are they giving up per 100 possessions? Like these aren't analytics, right? These are just descriptions of what's going on. You can then go a step higher and you can, adjust the offensive and defensive rating for teammate quality and opponent quality, and get something like regularized adjusted plus minus. Again, a quite simple stat, but like a little bit more complicated. But to sort of putting the puzzles together, it's just the descriptive stats are very useful because in real time we often don't get a sense of like which lineups are performing and which lineups are not performing. Just to give an example, there's been a lot of, like from Raptors land, there's been a lot of fuss about the Raptors bench and not being as good as the Raptors bench was last year. But actually their most used bench unit has like a +10 net rating on the year, which is actually very good. So it's been kind of combinations of you take one guy out and you put another guy in, that lineup has tended to perform badly. But so far, and it's still a fairly small sample, the main bench unit has actually been fine. And that doesn't mean there's no cause for concern, because that lineup is extremely sensitive. Like you plug one guy out, put another guy in, things tend to be disasters, and the sample is small. So it's entirely possible that things will start going south and that things we're seeing are consistent with, this being sort of lucky. But it's still useful, I think, to be able to look at those numbers and say, actually, okay, our bench unit isn't getting killed, not on the aggregate anyway. Because it isn't, and that's a different point to start from. Doesn't mean there's nothing to be concerned about, like I said, but it's a fact, right? And when we're talking about descriptive statistics, we are talking about facts, right? So like we always want to be dealing with reality, such as it is. Yeah. So, why do teams struggle and why do things go wrong? Well, to me, that's kind of what's fun about it, like trying to piece it together from watching film and just looking at, the quantifiable stuff, like what lineups are doing well, when are things going south, what combinations of players are doing poorly. is it because we're now playing new combinations of players, or is it because combinations of players that were working, were not working, are not working anymore? So I have actually, can I ask a Blazers question?
Oh yeah.
So one thing I was really interested in with the Blazers at the beginning of the year was Evan Turner got off to a great start, right? Yeah. And I love Evan Turner. Evan Turner is so fun, and he's such a sweetheart. Everybody would want him to do well. And I remember watching him and thinking, you want to believe that he's just going to turn it around and have a great season, right? That maybe all these bad years that he's had aren't real, are aberrations, or he's going to improve. So has he kept it up?
That is such a great question.
Yeah.
Cassie, do you want to start or should I start?
I think my biggest observation about it is I think that the lineup around him has changed so much recently about who he's surrounded with that I think that maybe that really strong start isn't appearing to be as strong, but I'm wondering if it is the different lineups that we've tried. And I think we just are looking for that perfect combination for him to lead a group of guys.
Yeah, and then that's exactly what I'm talking about, because you can go to NBA.com and look at the different lineups that he's played in, and look at the lineups he played at the beginning of the year, and look at the lineups he's played in recently, and see which one of those lineups are working and which ones aren't, right? And that kind of helps you put the puzzle together as to what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Is it a guy who had been playing at a fairly low level, having a blip and then regressing, or is it a question of we finally found the right things to do with him, but now we've tried to push him to back into doing stuff that he can't do anymore, right? And or that maybe he's not suited to do. And yeah, I think it's looking at those, just looking at the lineup data from NBA.com can just tell you a ton. It can really kind of clarify the stories from watching the game and help you put the puzzle together, which to me is the fun part.
When you look at that lineup data, are you primarily looking at the difference between the offensive rating and the defensive rating, or the net rating, to figure out and determine whether or not a lineup is successful?
Yeah. And in small samples that can be a problem, right? Because there's going to be a fair amount of luck associated with that. So one thing, if you want to be a little more advanced, what I would do next is go for, so I have lineup data. I don't have luck-adjusted lineup data, but you can go, for example, to Jacob Goldstein's player impact plus-minus page and look, and he will give you on-off data for each player over a game, over a set of games. It's easy to figure out, which will give you what's called luck-adjusted net ratings. So I can't get them for lineups, but I can get them for players in the sense of luck adjustment means okay, maybe we had a 90 defensive rating in this 6-minute stretch where this particular lineup went out, but we committed 3 shooting fouls, and it just happened to be that the opponents missed all the shots.
Oh, well, I've been waiting for a place to look that up for so long. Oh my God, that's
you just
gold mine.
The door.
You just that's the biggest Christmas present. I'm so excited.
Okay. I had just looked up luck adjustment. Luck adjustment, all of these stats, people who do, who are really hard stat heads, your sort of Jeremiah Engelman and, Jacob Goldstein types, who do this as more than a hobby. So luck adjustment gets more and more complicated. But the basic form of luck adjustment is you adjust for how often do you send guys to the line, and then you have the average make rates of each of the guys you send to the line. And so you would basically plug in those average make rates rather than the actual make rates, right? Because you might get unlucky and you're fouling, DeAndre Jordan. So I know DeAndre Jordan is hitting his free throws this year, or you're fouling Andre Roberson and sending him to the line, and he just happens to hit 6, right? But it was still a good idea to foul him, right? You might get unlucky because he hits the shots. And the other is three-pointers. That's getting complicated because it used to be the case that the story was defenses had no control over 3-point make rates. They only had control over 3-point attempt rates. And I think that's changing because I think NBA defenses are learning how to make 3-point shots worse. And one thing this year, for example, 3-point make rate is way, way down. So, but nevertheless, you can see whether a 3 is open or wide open or contested. and you'll have make rates for open, wide open, and contested threes. So it might be that you do a really good job of contesting your threes, but the other team just happens to hit them all. Then you're unlucky, right? Or you might give up a ton of open threes, but most guys are only hitting 50% on open threes from the corner. So it's obviously a really, really productive shot, but it wouldn't be shocking that you just missed 3 in a row, right? Even if you're a good three-point shooter. You just have an off.
The Blazers have been terrible from the corner this year.
Exactly.
So maybe it's just luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent it is luck. Like, it's not luck in the sense that, like, the player that's in a slump, it's not, slumps are real things, and, like, some players are streaky, but he has to keep shooting because they're never going to break out of the slump if they don't keep shooting. So the fact, it's good that they're taking those shots even though they're missing them. From a fan perspective, it's really frustrating to watch people miss wide open threes. But in a sense, yeah, you can argue that those lineups are actually playing better than the numbers would say on offensive rating because they're taking the right shots, and they're, at some point those numbers will correct, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe your 3-point shooter just fell off a cliff, but that's usually not the story, right? When guys are missing threes, it's usually because they're slumping. If there's a big sample of them making threes at a good clip in the past.
Okay, I wanted to jump in and ask one thing about, like, if you were preferring for your team, would you prefer that they made more 3 attempts but with a lower success rate, or that they took fewer 3-point attempts but with a higher success rate?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I would prefer that my team have the highest, like, effective field goal percentage possible. But it's interesting because the 3-point shot is still kind of evolving in the NBA, like how it's contested, whether you can contest it effectively or whether you can just prevent shots. Like, is the right defense just to chase guys off the line and try to prevent shots, or is it to encourage people to take bad threes above the break contested threes? Generally, I think the view is still you want to chase guys off the line. You want to keep your opponent's 3-point attempt rate down. That's still, I think, the cornerstone of what people think, good defense is. But I don't know if it will always stay that way because there are, the 3-point revolution is still reasonably recent. Like, I mean, it's been going on for a while, but, 3-point attempts per game have been going up and up and up. They're hitting a new high this year. There's got to be a point where, there's saturation. And as I've said, using the B-ball ref numbers, last year the average 3-point make rate was 36.2. Right now it's 35.0. That's a huge difference in terms of how efficient those shots are. But there's secondary effects, right? Because you get spacing. So one of the things teams are doing by making up for it is getting a lot of shots at the rim, right? And that's something the Blazers do a lot with Nurkic, right? So if Nurkic has a lot of spacers around him, then he's going to be way more efficient at the rim. And he has been way more efficient at the rim. And that's really improved his game. But part of that is just, he's not getting crowded inside. And so he's got more space to make his shots. So, it's not just the 3-point makes, it's the fact that the spacing opens up, room for guys to operate inside. And I think that's, that's such a huge point and a huge part of why the 3-point revolution has sort of led to, increases in offensive rating among teams. But I find it really fascinating because I think, at some point you're probably going to hit diminishing returns with, like, whether you want to be taking more and more threes. But 3-point attempt, every 3-point attempt, does provide spacing outcomes, and that tends to improve your offense. Even if you're not making the shots, like even if you're trading that in for a fairly low shot make rate. On the other hand, if your shot make rate from 3 gets low enough, teams may start ignoring you, right? And sort of not bothering to close out and being more concerned about the pass inside. And so then it can start to have counter effects. So, as defenses evolve and strategies evolve, I mean, that's part of what makes basketball so interesting. It's always an arms race between offense and defense, and people analyzing the game are sort of struggling to keep up and understand. And of course, the guys that work for teams are always trying to find, like, what's the ultimate strategy that, especially, as the Warriors age and their core breaks out, what's going to be the next kind of winning strategy in the NBA. So I mean, it's all pretty fascinating stuff.
Definitely. So we've talked a lot about how teams are using stats and how you can watch stats via teams, but how do you think the league uses stats to maybe affect policy changes or rule changes or things like that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know anyone who works in the league, so I don't have any idea. I know that this year the big change has been foul calling, like the increase in foul calling and concern with freedom of movement. And there's been a lot of complaining about that because, it has caused offensive rating to spike a little again, right? So this is actually, it's not quite like it was like in the 50s and 60s, but offense keeps going up. I was looking at this the other day, and I don't want to make a definitive statement because I was just kind of casual glancing, but it looks to me like almost all of the increase in offensive rating, and again, I'm just using league-wide averages from D-Ball Ref, offensive rating has spiked from 106.6 to 109.7. That's a huge jump year to year. Almost all of it, though, it looks to me, and I haven't done the calculation, it's a simple calculation, I haven't done it, so I don't want to be definitive, but I would say almost all of it looks like it's just because they're calling more fouls. So there's guys are getting to the line, right? And there's been such a crackdown on players that can't shoot, right? So, DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond and these guys that used not to be able to shoot, well, now they're at least 60% free throw shooters because it's just death. Otherwise, you just can't afford to not be able to shoot free throws. And so those are essentially free points, right? Almost, it's 70%, 75% or something like that make rate on average in the league. And so if you're calling more shooting fouls, offense is going to go up because it's a possession where you get points. And so I know that the policy, there's been some controversy around that because nobody wants to watch games where it's like the whole second quarter, like the last 6 minutes of second quarter, it's just guys walking to the line. And that definitely happens. And there's also, I guess, concern that, you're making it impossible to play defense, in order because fans casual fans like to watch scoring. I'm not quite sure I buy that. Like, I think some of it may have been also to discourage injury because last season was such an awful year for injuries, just make defenders back off. But I haven't really had the sense that you can't defend anymore. Good defensive teams like the Thunder, the Celtics, the Nuggets, those teams are defending amazingly well, and they're doing it in very different styles. It's absolutely like the Grizzlies. You can hold teams to low. You can hold opponents scoring down, okay, even with freedom of movement. But I think it's just the foul calling is unpleasant. But I think they really think they need to enforce this to try to get freedom of movement. Whether it's mostly about injuries or whether it's mostly about offense, I don't know. But I think it's probably an injury thing.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to think about. This is absolutely fabulous. One quick question, and then we'll probably start wrapping it up here pretty soon. Do you have a favorite kind of insight or story that you uncovered that you maybe might not have if you hadn't, been diving into the numbers, something that just made you go, oh, what do you know?
It happens all the time. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are that were really wow, everybody's wrong and about this. It's mostly sort of small things in the sense that, so one thing, if you follow me on Twitter, I rarely tweet during games. I'll tweet during games of teams I don't follow, because I don't care if I say something stupid about a team I don't follow. But I rarely tweet during Raptors games, and if I do, it's something like, wow, Siakam is amazing, or something just anodyne like that. Because I find that if I'm watching the game, and I'll, like I gave with my example, the Miami game last year, I just may tweet things that are kind of wrong, right? Because, watching basketball is hard, and I'm not that good at it. And so I usually wait till after the game, then I look at the numbers, and then I'll rewatch parts of the game. If I have time. Obviously I can't do this all the time. I have other things to do in life, but, and then maybe the story that I saw, the story that people saw is a little bit different than what actually happened. And when I get grumpy on Twitter, which happens, reasonable amount, I'm fairly grumpy, it's usually because I'm reacting against, just kind of somebody tweets something and then everyone starts saying it, based on like watching in game. It's like, no. Like, just look at the numbers. Like, that's not what's actually happening. And, you know, you don't want to push this too far because sometimes numbers can be misleading, especially in small sample. But, you know, at the same time, I find a lot of NBA writing, you know, it's very, very narrative driven. And, you know, I think numbers are a way we can kind of bust through narratives a little bit, in the sense we can challenge, really, you know, really, is this really what's happening? And I think there is that. I mean, I think lots of teams, like, one of the things that the NBA is so fun this year, because like there's so many teams playing really different ways, you know, and trying really different combinations of players than what has been thought of as like, you have to play a certain way. You know, or like, to me, like the Rockets are such an interesting story. And I don't know exactly what's wrong with the Rockets, but we've gone from, they were, you know, arguably the best team or second best team in the NBA last year, to their disaster. And they're playing exactly the same way, with almost the same personnel. And they lost the role players, but it's not like Trevor Ariza is having anything like a decent season. He's one of the worst players in the NBA. They were always a shallow team. And you know, they've got their core 4 guys back and core 5 guys back, and suddenly things have gone like pear-shaped. And to me, it's like, why? What exactly? And I don't watch them enough or spend enough time with the numbers to dive into that. But to me, those are the kinds of questions. Like, what? Because a year ago, it was like, you have to play like the Rockets. This is the way to play in the modern NBA. And it's like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe this is not the way to play in the modern NBA. Is it the strategy that people have caught up to? Is it the players have aged out of the window where they can execute that strategy? I mean, Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker are very old. You know, Harden's not a young man. Chris Paul, of course, is you know, people thought he would never decline, but I think was probably optimistic. Yeah, so like, to me, it's like just so much like, oh, well, the Rockets, you know, and I don't think anybody really saw this coming. Like, I think a lot of people said like, oh, they'll probably win 5 or 10 less games. That's why I was like, oh, they'll win 10 less games, but it's not even clear they'll make the playoffs. I mean, maybe they will. Or, you know, the Kings, right? Like, who saw the Kings coming? No one. Like, literally no one. I remember late in the summer, I was involved in a Twitter thread, and I made some comment about the Suns core being better than the Kings core. And somebody was like, really? I mean, who's better? And then I was like, I need to find that guy again. Because the closest thing I found is someone saying, like, the Kings are not that bad. That guy should take a victory lap. And maybe he is. He's not a follower of mine, so maybe he's out there on Twitter taking a victory lap. But I've never seen anyone predict that the Kings were coming. So I think we get things wrong, right? Narratives can be wrong. And the thing I love about stats is that they help us, you know, not get caught up in narratives and not see what we think we need to see or what everyone says we should see. And I think that's what makes, you know, using statistics as approach to basketball fascinating. But I should say again, I want to be cautious just so I don't come off as a know-it-all that, like, you know, it's perfectly fine not to use stats, to watch basketball and not watch stats. The only thing I would say is, if you're watching basketball, you're not taking it to the numbers, unless you've been watching basketball your whole life, or played at a really high level, coached or something like that. You should probably be a little cautious and humble about what you're seeing, because what you're seeing is, I mean, everybody thinks their eye test is perfect. Nobody's eye test is perfect. So you don't have to like watch it. You don't have to be a basketball intellectual to participate on basketball Twitter and enjoy the game. You absolutely don't. And I talk to all sorts of people who are, you know, just really fun basketball players that follows and don't. But if you just be humble about what you're seeing, because it's a hard sport to watch and you probably don't have any particular insight with your eye test.
Awesome. I love that, actually. I'm definitely going to start watching games probably a little bit differently.
You mentioned throughout your talks a few different resources. Would you kind of wrap up by sharing those again, some of your favorite places to look for stats and maybe some of your favorite like writers or follows on Twitter for people who may be interested in learning more?
Sure. So, I mean, so after a game, I always go and I just go to NBA.com. So NBA.com is not the easiest website to use initially, but it's one of those things too, where if you just put a question out on Twitter, how would I find this information on NBA.com? Someone will just tell you, right? It's like, people are really, really helpful. So after every game, if I'm paying attention, I go to NBA.com, I look at the lineup data for the game, the on-offs, the net ratings of the different lineups. I look at, the player impact estimate, which is one of my favorite advanced stats, which nobody pays attention to, but it's a very nice productivity stat from NBA.com that tells you how it basically tells you how productive was this player in the sense of it's a ratio of his productivity contributions, very, very simply measured, divided by all the productivity contributions made by each team while he was on the floor. So that means it penalizes you if your lineups are getting torched, right? Because that would raise the denominator. There'd be more stuff going on for the other team. Or if your teammates are doing a lot and you're doing a little bit, the fact that you score a ton might not matter if all your teammates are scoring, because that makes scoring much easier for you. And that's a nice impact metric. Tells you within a lineup how much positive stuff was this person doing relative to everybody else on the floor. So I look at the lineup data, and I look at the individual player data, and then I will every day. So I go in and I look at the Jacob Goldstein's really nice composite metric called player impact plus minus. Can I just give one quick definition here? So
yeah.
Know what the terms I'm using are.
For sure, absolutely.
So there's two ways of assessing a player. There's what's called productivity, which would just be like points plus rebounds plus assists plus steals plus blocks, minus field goal attempts minus turnovers. That would be what's called EFF, which is the efficiency, like the most basic productivity metric that there is. And there's more complicated ones but they're just box score components. And then there's what's called impact, and impact would be on-off, like how well does the team do when you're on the floor versus how well when you're off the floor. So there's two different concepts. And then what we call composite metrics would be combinations of productivity and impact, which in total should give a kind of measure of how good and useful is this player, not in a global sense, but right now, like how much is he contributing? How good has he been this year? So there are three stats that I know of that are composite metrics based on combinations of productivity and impact. One is, and my favorite one, although it's only my favorite because it corresponds best with my eye test, so take that with a grain of salt, is Jacob Goldstein's player impact plus minus. Another one is Jacob Goldstein's colleague at Basketball Index, whose name I can't remember. He goes by Courageous McBasketball, I think is his Twitter handle, called points over expectation. That I don't entirely know how it's calculated, but it's another kind of composite impact productivity stat. And then there's Real Plus Minus, which is available at ESPN, and it comes out weekly. PIPM is updated daily, so I always check that, and I look to see how different players are doing that I like or follow around the league. And then I will look at things like, defense dashboard to look at how many shots are different players contesting and what are their positive contest rates. Again, stuff that's hard to see with the eyes, but unless you're watching super, super, super closely and over again, but are easily quantifiable. So just B-Ball Ref and NBA.com. I don't have a subscription to Cleaning the Glass or Synergy. Which are fancier sites for this kind of stuff, which a lot of professionals or semi-professionals have subscriptions to those sites to use those data. I would, but I already with the Patreons and stuff, I already kind of pay enough for my basketball hobby, so I don't really want a subscription. But again, just like starting simple with the most simple stats. If you want to get into it, nothing has to be complicated. Nothing has to be something where you have a PhD in statistics to understand it, right? Just descriptive stuff. And so, those are the sites that I mostly use, the Player Impact Plus Minus, the B-Ball Index site, which has both points over expectation and PIPM, and also B-Ball Ref and NBA.com. Those are my sites. In terms of who you should follow, definitely follow, if you're into stats, definitely follow Jacob Goldstein, Jeremiah Engelman, who is the creator of Real Plus Minus, various just interesting writers around Twitter that I think, are totally worth following and that give really nice insights, sort of that give mixes of eye test and plus minus or impact or sort of analytic stuff. I mean, there's a lot of people online for that kind of stuff. I don't want to just start sort of shouting people out on Twitter that I really enjoy following. And especially a lot of them would be concentrated in Raptors Twitter anyway, which is, I assume, not that many Raptors fans out there. But there's a lot of fun resources, and there's a lot of really cool people to talk to. And most of the analytics guys, like Jay Goldstein, doesn't follow me. Like, we don't have a relationship, but if I ask him a question on Twitter, like, he'll often answer. Like, he'll usually answer. Like, he's a really nice guy, and a lot of the analytics guys are really, interactive.
That's so great. I'm so looking forward to going and getting started.
Yeah.
I mean, I play around on all of those, the sites that you've mentioned, but you really laid out very clearly like the difference between productivity and impact. And that just is going to like help me think about, what I'm talking about when I'm trying to analyze what's going on. Am I talking about someone's productivity, or am I talking about the impact? And just knowing that those are separate things is really
I should probably say, like, those are my definitions. Like, people sometimes impact to imply what I mean by composite. So like, those are the definitions I find useful to use, but I'm not sure these things have ever been like formally defined.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what when I say impact, that's what I mean.
Oh, it's a great framework for just how to even, start looking.
Yeah. It's always good to have definitions.
Any other questions, Cassidy?
I think I have a lot to digest.
Well, Anna, could you tell folks how they can follow you, and are you available like if we have questions?
Yeah, for sure. You can always tweet at me. And so my Twitter handle is @AnnaJaneSmith4 is my username. So all one word, all lowercase, Anna Jane Smith 4. Yes, there's 3 others. My Twitter handle is Verticality, although I occasionally change it. During the playoffs, I usually change it to small sample size thespian. But then, I turn it back. So I change it back. So that would be how you could find me on Twitter. Right. And people, obviously people are welcome to tweet questions at me. It's, if they want, but again, I'm not any kind of expert on this stuff. I'm just someone who, this is just the way I approach basketball. So, I was happy to talk about basketball because it's my obsession, but like there are definitely real experts out there, and I'm not one of them.
I think you have just from following you on Twitter has been a really great resource. So don't sell yourself short there.
Yeah.
You're wonderful.
Well,
Thank you for spending your time with us. And
it's my first podcast I've done in a year, so it's always fun.
Awesome.
Doing one a year is pretty good. Okay.
We should try to double that. We'll have you back at the end of the season to like go over some of the stats. When is like a good sample size? Because I know people are always talking about small sample sizes, and then eventually like people stop saying that. But like for you, if you're gonna look at like lineup data, do you look at it by like total minutes that they've played together, or just look at like halfway through the season? Then we can really start kind of telling.
One of my arguments is always that like net rating and plus minus in really small sample sizes tell us more than like, people say, oh, well, plus minus is meaningless in like a game or a 2-game sample. I tend to disagree. I think plus minus actually generally tells you, I just don't think the noise from luck is so big. So I tend to think like even quite small samples can tell you stuff. You just have to be, the adjustment that you make for noise has to be, you need to be making the mental adjustment for noise the smaller the sample, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously we're talking like 2 minutes. So when I do a lineup search on NBA.com for the last game, like I always cut out lineups that didn't play together for at least 2 minutes, because at that point, just it's noise, it's pure noise. But it's just a judgment call. Like it's just a personal judgment call as to when lineup there's enough of it that you can make that assessment.
Yeah.
And I think like there are no cut and hard and dry rules. You just, one of these things where it's like, well, this lineup's a lot better than you think, because look, they have like the Raptors bench is better than you think. It has a 10.6 net rating. Like you have to be willing. People come back and say, dude, it's a 40-minute sample.
What always happens to us is that I look at the Trailblazers lineup data, and then I always have to take out the Phoenix game, because there's always a Phoenix game in there that skews all of the results.
Yeah, right.
Poor Phoenix.
No, that's the trick though. Like that's the trick is you can't take out the Phoenix game. Like that's where you want to be cautious. Where it's like I'm just gonna pull this game out because I think it doesn't tell the real story. Because
right. Well, that's why I like erase that from all the results because it's like skews everything. When you beat them by 40 points, like last year, the first game they won by like 40 points, and so it was like. For the first, half of the season, I had to just not include that game because it just skewed everything so completely.
Right. No, I get that, and especially this year because the bad teams in the NBA are so bad. Like it's the Raptors game against the Bulls, and I think they won by 39 points or something, and it's like this is not telling you anything about like we were running out our G leaguers. It was like Lorenzo Brown and Malachi Richardson and like. A couple of like deep rotation guys, and it's like they're all like plus 20. It's like guys, this does not mean Lorenzo Brown is going to go plus 20 against the Warriors. Like it's just you need to not take this lineup data seriously. So yeah, everything with respect to everything with a grain of salt, and like be use your common sense and your eye test of course too. It's not totally valueless.
Right on. Well, thanks again so much. You have a lovely week ahead of you. And like I said, we'll try to make it 2 podcasts in a year. How's that?
Sure. Sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
Very much for having me, guys. Go Blazers.
That is going to do us for this edition of Women's Hoops and Talks. We are hosted by Blazers Edge. If you like what you heard, please go to Blazers Edge Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe and rate and review. We release a new episode of What every other Thursday. And if you want to know more about Blazers What, you can follow us on Twitter at Hoops and Talks. And don't forget, we've got a meetup on December 17th at the McMinimum's Broadway Pub to watch the Clipper game. You can find me on Twitter at Cassidy Gemmett. And how about you, Tara?
I am on Twitter at TCB Biggs. Cassidy, it was great to talk to you, and let's do this again.
Sounds good. Go Blazers! Woo-hoo.